Vaughn. I'm the director of Silent Cry. And out of my own silent tears, I have a bill called Post-Traumatic Prison Disorder, Shawanna W76337. As an African American female who went to prison at 17, I understand the detriment of mass incarceration as it pertains to me. And so I have all these other amazing people on this panel because they share my experience, and we all share a different encounter of the experience. And there's some therapists here, there's some trauma people here, and they're amazing, and the work they do is amazing. But this bill is to create a holistic atmosphere in incarceration. And yes, I want half by 2030, but I need people to be whole right now. And so this bill encompasses correctional officers being mandated to therapy. It encompasses harm reduction, because I know that the guards that go to work every day are also incarcerated, and they also suffer trauma, and they're also mentally impacted, and they become harmers and oppressors, and it creates a hostile environment. I also thought about people who are doing long-term time and the things that are not afforded to them in that sentence. And I think that no matter where you are geographically, everybody deserves to be mentally whole and free within. Happen if we are subjected to people who don't understand our pain. And so I am hoping and praying that this bill addresses those things. We talk about post-traumatic stress disorder, but it doesn't yield the same benefits to people who are formerly incarcerated. I'm also calling for marijuana for post-incarceration as a point of therapy. Due to the fact that we give it to postpartum mothers, we give it to people with cancer, we give it to people with post-traumatic stress disorder. But the people who suffered from it, from the repercussions of it, from the 1994 and the RICO Acts, are African Americans and Latinos. And those are the people that suffer the most harm from going to prison. So they too deserve the same benefits as post-traumatic stress disorder. So those are a few things that this bill encompasses. And I'm looking for those who want to gather and support holistic approach to mental health. And I believe that we can do it together. And I believe this panel is a great showing of people of what togetherness can do. So I'll stop talking and let them get to it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Shawanna. Thank you very, very much. And again, bless your heart for all the work that you're doing. And I think here's where we can start to get into who's on this panel. And I think the makeup of who we are and what we've been through and what our expertise in will speak a lot to a lot of the issues that you just raised, and perhaps how we can get to a place where these things are actually a reality and we're no longer talking about it, and we're in a place past that, right? So I'm going to just first introduce all of the amazing speakers and people on the line right now. I'm going to do that, and then we're going to get on with our research presentation, and then from there we're going to get into our discussion. So first, I want to mention Lauren Hagani from the Center for Justice at Columbia University, working with the Confined Arts, doing research. I want to also acknowledge Anastasia Smid, PhD candidate at UC Riverside. I want to also acknowledge Assemblymember Joelle Jones. I want to acknowledge Richard Griffin of the 327 Consulting Group. I want to acknowledge Stephanie Carnegie of Totality of a Woman. I want to recognize Arthur Rambert, a community stakeholder and activist. I want to recognize Glenn Martin of Jim Trainers, LLC, and Jim Real Estate, LLC. I also want to recognize Phil Gittner of the Office of Brian Benjamin in New York. I finally want to recognize Dr. Caroline Griffin Hunt, creator for Greatness Leadership Group, Inc. And can we just take a second to just clap it up for each other? I think that there's a lot of dope people on this line. I got excited just listening to everybody, you know? So I'm gonna share screen right now. I'm not gonna waste time. I'm gonna share screen right now, Lauren, and I'm gonna let you go. As you need me to change, just cue me.
Thank you, Isaac, for the introduction, and Shawanna for organizing this event and this important bill, and everyone on the panel. And thanks to everyone on Facebook for coming to the town hall today to discuss the post-traumatic prison disorder bill. Give me 1 second. Okay. So I'm Lauren Hagani, and I'm the research director of the Confined Arts. And part of what our organization does is conduct and utilize research to further advocacy efforts on the issue of incarceration. So the aim of my brief presentation here today is to tie the empirical work done by the Confined Arts and other researchers to discuss the importance of this bill in supporting policies regarding mental health resources for people returning home from prisons and jails. You can change the slide. So I want to begin by defining the issue. What is post-traumatic prison disorder? There is an abundance of research across numerous disciplines, including psychology, neuroscience, and sociology, that explore the psychological toll that incarceration has on people in prisons and jails, or people returning back to their communities post-incarceration. A 2013 interview study with 25 people recently released from life sentences found that participants expressed some symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, including flashbacks, nightmares, avoidance, hyperarousal, and emotional numbing. But the researchers also found that people released suffered from symptoms separate from a PTSD diagnosis, such as internalized subordination, trouble with decision-making, sensory disorientation, and social alienation. This study, among others, reveals that detention-related psychological problems extend beyond symptoms typical of PTSD. The bill we are discussing today recognizes post-traumatic prison disorder as a subset of PTSD specific to incarceration in order to allow for a more adequate recognition of the psychological effects of incarceration and offer treatment accordingly. Next slide. The high rates of mental illness and PTSD among people who are or who have been incarcerated is not only an indication of the harsh conditions of confinement, but of how the criminal legal system disproportionately targets people who are mentally ill or who have experienced trauma. According to a 2016 report from the Treatment Advocacy Center, there are nearly 10 times the number of people with serious mental illness in prisons and jails than in all the nation's state hospitals combined. More than half of all people in prisons and jails have a mental health concern, and about 1 in 5 people in state prisons have a serious mental illness. Additionally, people who are incarcerated disproportionately come from low-income communities of color who have more frequent and forceful encounters with police. The psychological impact of policing is another emerging area of research that is especially pertinent today, given the protests to racism and excessive use of force in light of George Floyd's murder earlier this week. Policing and incarceration are overlapping systems that target populations that have higher need for social services and treatments, exposing them to further sources of stress and trauma, all while denying them necessary resources and social support systems. Next slide. But beyond the human rights argument that I would hope people would find compelling enough, why is it important that we try to address the psychological damages of incarceration? Many studies have found that there are higher rates of jail recidivism among people with substance use disorders or severe mental illness. People with symptoms of mental illness are also more likely to act out in prison, leading to time in solitary confinement and longer sentences. Addressing the psychological damages of incarceration is important to efforts to shorten sentence length and reduce the number of people incarcerated in prisons and jails. High recidivism rates also negatively impact families and communities, which suffer economic and social tolls from high reincarceration rates. Next slide. At the Confined Arts, I recently finished conducting a study where we interviewed 17 people who had been incarcerated in male and female facilities in New York State. When asked how they prepared themselves for release, every single person interviewed answered that they prepared themselves largely without any support from their facility. This is the issue we are here to discuss today. Beyond just housing and vocational services, which are incredibly important to people's transitions home, how can prisons and jails do better to psychologically prepare people for their return back to the community post-incarceration? Some people I interviewed had been incarcerated at a young age and had served upwards of 40, 50 years behind bars and returned home to a changed world where the family they knew, the technology they knew, the places they knew were gone or altered beyond recognition. Some people, after serving 1 or 2 years behind bars at the age of 30 or 40, returned home and found it hard to leave their rooms after being released because they were so used to confinement. The family they knew, the technology they knew, the places they knew were gone or altered. And would also ask permission to use the bathroom or get food from the fridge. Some people shared being triggered by certain noises, sights, or authority figures, making it hard to be in crowded places or feel comfortable in the workplace. A 2014 study found that rates of PTSD symptoms were 10 times higher among incarcerated people than rates found in the general population. The Confined Arts is committed to furthering research on what daily experiences and events trigger coping responses symptomatic of PTSD. But given what we do already know, what do we need to do to help people cope with the psychological damages they incur after being forced into a system that confines them, subjugates them, tears them away from friends and family, and requires them to fend for themselves? Preliminary studies suggest that community transition, mental health, and substance use services for incarcerated youth and adults are associated with lower rates of recidivism and better health outcomes. The bill we are discussing today seeks to extend the impact of transitional mental health services for people returning home. Next slide. So going into today's discussion, we are fortunate to have a skilled and innovative team of public officials, doctors, scientists, artists, and people who have been directly impacted by incarceration who can speak to the needs of this population and brainstorm ways to support them. So without further ado, I'll pass the invisible mic back to Isaac, who will, I think, introduce the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you very, very, very much, Lauren. That was amazing. Can we just snap it up, clap it up for her right there and putting that together for us? That presentation was actually put together in about 3 days, but we wanted to make sure that we had something to bring to the table because, and I think here's where we can start to talk a little bit. We needed to make sure that we had something to bring to the table because there's a huge public narrative that says that, you know, people who go to prison, you know, deserve to be there, and what happens to them as a result of them being there does not matter and should not be taken into consideration in any way. And that is a very inhumane thing to believe. And with that line of thinking is the forgetful, it's not even the forgetfulness, it's more so of the ignoring of the psychological traumas and what this leaves you with as it relates to what you have to adapt to mentally. So there's the humane process of incarceration that's not really ever articulated unless you hear it from the person or a person who has been there, you know, and this is why it's important that we have folks who have experienced incarceration at the table. So this is why I'm very, very excited about this conversation. The questions are very much tailored to the variety and expertise in our speakers. So we're just going to flow with it. I'm going to do my best to ask the next person's question as it relates to how the person who answered before them goes, so that we can keep the conversation going in the same direction, if you know what I mean. But I want to first introduce myself as the panel moderator, because I haven't done that yet. Isaac Scott. I'm a formerly incarcerated artist and activist. I have created this program called the Confined Arts at the Center for Justice at Columbia University. I created it before I was accepted into Columbia as a Justice and Education Scholar. I created it a year after I had come home from prison in 2014. So I served 9 years in prison, and I had just come home with a bag full of art. And I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I know I'm not going back to prison. And I know whatever I do is going to be related to artistry and using the arts in some way, shape, form, or fashion. over the years, what I was able to do was build a platform where we use our artistry to advocate and to highlight the role of the arts. And the way that the Confined Arts does that is through building the capacity of other artists to censor their voice, to do their work. And it's in this space where I met Shawanna. You know, I met Shawanna as a poet. I didn't meet her as this fierce advocate. I met her as a poet and then found out she was this fierce advocate. And I really did fall in love with her. And we've been rocking for a little while now. So that is what the Confined Arts does. We use research specifically to tailor our advocacy strategies, because we believe that if we have the voices of people who've experienced that thing and we have the research to support what we're saying, we think that there's no argument that can counter that. And we want to make sure that we come to the table with as much support and backing to an issue. So that is who I am. That is the Confined Arts, but it's not about me. I just wanted to give some context so we know why we're on this platform. But first, I want to actually go to Dr. Hunt, if that's cool. I actually want to, given your background as a trauma psychologist, how do the racial disparities of the criminal justice system heighten post-traumatic prison disorder across gender?
Okay, hello everyone. I'm honored to be a part of this panel. I want to introduce who I am. I am Dr. Carl-Ann Griffith Hunt, and I am founder and CEO of Creative for Greatness Leadership Group. I am a UN woman, that's the United Nations woman. I'm senior advisor to members of the Senate, Congress, and the New York State Assembly. I'm a professor, and I wear many hats here in New York City as well. I've been over 60 schools in my career as well. And so to answer your question, in order for me to really, oh, and by the way, I'm a human, industrial, and trauma psychologist. And so in order for me to really answer your question, we have to go to the beginning. All right. And the beginning is what society does. So society, what we do is we incarcerate a behavior or an act. And in doing so, being a psychologist, I know that behavior is secondary, right? Behavior is a language. Behavior is not the reason why someone commits a crime. So we have to look at what causes it. And we can't look at what causes it without then looking at the ACEs. And I don't know if any of you ever looked at the ACEs or heard of the ACEs, but it's and some of you may be familiar with the adverse childhood experiences. And adverse childhood experiences is one thing, but something that we don't talk about a lot that I am pushing for more and more is adverse community experiences. It's very important that we understand that, and because 67% of individuals in our communities experience some form of adverse childhood experience or adverse community experience. And it relates to trauma, whether it's substance abuse, homelessness, incarceration, emotional and sexual abuse, violence, discrimination, or poverty. We have to look at that. 7 out of 10 of our children experience some form of the ACEs. So when we start to look at that, we start to see how it connects then to adulthood. And so there's a connection between the two where you have the ACEs, and the ACEs for children can actually trigger post-traumatic stress disorder. And so if that triggers post-traumatic stress disorder, and then an individual becomes incarcerated, they're going into prison already with PTSD, with dealing with trauma because of the ACEs. And so now you have now them already in prison with PTSD or some form of trauma. They experience trauma in prison, and then they come out into our society, and we expect them to be whole individuals, when in fact we have not even taken care of what the cause, what the root of them being a part of this is in the first place. And so in order for us to think about them coming back into the reentry program. I work with Homeland Security on this. I work with, the Brooklyn DA's office, the Bronx Department of Probation. I work with all of these different parts of the systems so that they can get a clear understanding that when individuals are incarcerated, they are already dealing with trauma. They deal with trauma before incarceration, while they're incarcerated. When they come out, they're dealing with psychological, neurological, biological, and social issues, because trauma can take on the face of diabetes. Trauma takes on the face of hypertension. Trauma takes on the face of mental illness, and people have a misconception of what mental illness is, because mental illness is also depression. It's not just the schizophrenia that people tend to only think about. Mental illness is when you're in a toxic environment. Mental illness is when you are overcome and you're burned out. And some of us are that way with our jobs, right? So let's be realistic. And so if we're dealing with that, then all that trauma, yes, it's definite that an individual will have post-traumatic prison disorder, because we have not even, and that's complex trauma. So when they come out, we're dealing with complex trauma, historical trauma, and collective trauma. And that is why there's such a wonderful foundation for this bill, because we have evidence that can solidify what individuals go through. And I'm going to wrap it right now. But I want you to know that women, if you create that platform dealing with gender, they'll talk to you about, once you create trust, they'll speak to you about their traumas in their childhood, in their adulthood. But men, our society have not created a space for men to say what has happened to them. Our society equates weakness if you say, I need help. If a man says, I need help, guess what? All of a sudden now, he's a weak man, which is so unbelievable. I would say other things, but I am such a supporter for the males in our society, because I tell people I'm so over, women, everything, I'm so through with it, because we have to understand that either we say a man is weak or we call him a dog. So we don't give him a definition of self. And so without that, he's unable to say what has happened, and that prolongs healing. And so, yes, with gender, there is an issue, because our women tend to talk more than our men, but we have to create a safe space for our men to speak, especially seeing that though we make up, as minorities, we make up 32% of US population, there is actually, when we look at the numbers, there's more of us, about 56% of us in prison. So that is something that we need to talk about. Thank you.
Come on now, Dr. Hunt. Come on now. I was over here going crazy. Yes.
Yes, thank
all
you.
of that right on the nose. I feel like we could go home now. That you said it. You said it. You said it. And with that, it reminds me of a conversation I was just having with Stephanie Carnegie. So I'm going to actually call on you next, and I'm going to ask you, what are some of the existing narratives in Black and Brown communities that stigmatize mental health treatment?
Thank you, Pastor Scott and Shawanna. Thank you so much for being so powerful and full of strength to move forward with this bill. And I'm just so grateful and honored to be on this platform with so many amazing individuals today. Pastor Scott, before I even answer that question, I just have to say that Dr. Hunt, she just hit so many extremely important points. She just had, I'm sorry, I just was in my chat with like the little Twitter fingers, because everything that she was just saying just now was so profound. So many things that she said resonated and made me think about and reflect on the conversations that Shawanna and I have been having over the past couple of weeks, just in regards to trauma in our communities and just the layers of it and how deep it is. So when it comes down to the narratives, let me just start by introducing myself. My name is Stephanie Carnegie. I am the founder of Totality of a Woman. Totality of a Woman is a mental health and wellness organization that focuses on raising awareness on, first, the difference between mental health and mental illness in communities of color, because there is a difference, and automatically from that point, there comes a stigma behind having the discussions, because as soon as our communities hear the word mental health, they automatically think that they are suffering from a mental illness, or they're crazy, or there's something wrong with them. And so that already begins the stigma from not having the conversations and not talking about mental health. So our platform is to help raise awareness, and it is also to make sure that our communities are offered the same support and resources that other communities receive when it comes down to mental health and wellness, because our communities are the ones that are suffering the most. And we know with health disparities and so many other things, that we have the least amount of resources. So let me just start by saying that that's a part of our mission for the organization. We started off doing work specifically with women, because my organization was started because of my own journey in dealing with depression and anxiety, coming from a background of working in public relations, representing a lot of well-known entertainers and artists. I definitely could not show up and talk about the things that I was suffering from, or at least that was the stigma behind that. And so when I decided to break my own silence from what I was dealing with, that's how I launched Totality of a Woman. So we started in the space of working with women. And because I'm also a former educator, I used to be a speech therapist in the Board of Education. Then I went on to teach second grade in the Board of Education, as well as in charter schools in Bedford-Stuyvesant, where I am originally from. And in doing that, and in doing my research, I found that in communities of color, there was a crisis going on. And the crisis was that Brown and Black children ages 5 through 12 were suffering in crisis levels from suicide. And it was something that was not being talked about. 5 to 11, that was the crisis age in our community. So what happened is we decided to start programming that would address the trauma and the mental health issues that were going on in communities of color with our children. Also, in doing that and being in the community, we then saw that there was a silent killer happening in communities of color with our men. Over 6 million men a year suffer from depression. Over 3 million men a year suffer from anxiety, and the rate of suicide was increasing there. And that is the point where we decided that our communities needed healing on a 360 level. And so we started offering mental health and a holistic way of dealing with healing and trauma to the women, the men, and the children in our communities. So when you ask the question about the narrative was that we weren't talking about it. We weren't talking about it because of the stigma. We weren't talking about it because in households in our communities, most of the parents, their parents didn't talk to them. So when we talk about generational trauma or stigma that's been passed down, our communities didn't talk about mental health. Our communities didn't talk about how the things that were going on in the schools, in our communities, finances, socioeconomic, how they were affecting how we felt mentally, emotionally. How do you deal with stress in a healthy way? These conversations were void. They weren't happening. When I did my studies about what was going on in the schools, New York and Virginia were one of the first states to adopt that mental health education was going to be mandated for kindergarten through 12th grade. And then I went and I spoke to the parents and spoke to the kids. That wasn't happening either. So when you asked me about the narrative in the conversation, there was a lack of conversation. And one of the first campaigns that we launched was Stop the Stigma and Start the Conversation. The conversations that need to happen in the classroom, the conversations that need to happen in our communities, within our organizations. Obviously, first and foremost, the conversations that needed to happen at home. So there wasn't really a narrative going on. And what I found that, which is something that Dr. Hunt mentioned when we talk about creating safe spaces. So our organization started out with creating these safe spaces in our communities where people in the community could come and talk about it. She brought up a point about our men and what they say about how men are supposed to express themselves and their emotions and what strength looks like for a Black man. Let me say this, when we launched an initiative called Food, Fitness, and Faith for Men, and Shawanna and I connected because everything that Shawanna was saying about this bill and the holistic approach to healing is exactly what the communities needed. When we're talking about things like meditation, things like yoga, exercise and fitness, knowing the foods, nutrition, that there are things that you can eat and put inside of your body that help your mental health. And all of these things were approaches that we presented to our communities. And when we created the space, we found that the men talked. We had men that gathered that did not know one another, and they meditated together. They did yoga together. They exercised together. They sat and watched a chef cook food and talk about the healthy benefits. And then they sat down and they ate together. And we created a space called Shop Talk. Just like you men that are on here, the barbershop, like the beauty parlor, it's a place where you can kind of feel comfortable no matter who, you may not know the people around, but there are things that are just shared there, right? And that's what we created. And the men sat and they talked. They talked about their mental health. They talked about their physical health. They talked about finances, talked about relationships. So to circle back to your question, there was a lack of narrative when it came down to having a healthy and open and honest and vulnerable conversation about mental health and mental illness, how it's affecting our communities, and what we needed to do to create healing on a 360 level, meaning the men, the women, and the children, because it's affecting the entire community. And so that's, yeah.
Yes, thank you, Stephanie. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for saying that. I'm going to actually, because Shawanna put something in the chat that made me it hit right home, because I'm a parent, and in Black homes there's this narrative that what happens in this house stays in this house, right? We have this military household, and we in doing so, it prevents information from getting out, right? But I want to swing over a question to Mr. Jones, Representative Jones, and ask you, as a Black man in your position of leadership, what would you say to communities of color, especially men, Black men? What would you say about getting help and seeking mental health services and mental wellness, practices when necessary, and not sort of, ignoring that, which needs to take place because of these, existing narratives or lack thereof, if that makes sense. Was that a lot?
Definitely. I got you, Pastor Scott. And good evening, everyone. I'm happy to be on the call. It's so good to connect with all the power players here. But I would definitely say it's so critical for us to come together first as men, and also to develop ourselves mentally, spiritually, naturally, emotionally, all these different things. It's actually something we do here out in Detroit called Men's Prayer and Conversation, and we just come together, jump into the word, and then just have a conversation about what people have been experiencing during the week, and different goals setting that we can do in different working projects that we can do, because you really don't know what someone's going through until you have a conversation with them or until something happens. I think this is one of the critical pieces about the bill that Shawanna's been working on, is because we're trying to prevent something from happening. Because if something happens, with the mental breakdown or whatever the situation may be, everything can be prevented if we can be captured early on. And that's the biggest piece about this bill, is about getting involved ahead of time. And that's the same thing we have to do as men. It's like we have a lot of weight to carry on our shoulders, especially in the Black community. We have a lot of potential, but we have a lot of pressure at the same time. And sometimes brothers are not able to capture that spirit that we're supposed to have in order to keep everything going forward. And I think the key really is, making sure that we're bridging the gap. Me being a 25-year-old man, I sit down and talk with the OGs all the time just to figure out, what's different things that I can do so I don't bump my head the same way you bumped your head. And then I pass the same thing down to the youngest below me. So when we begin to bridge some of these generational gaps, we begin to bridge some of the educational gaps, the more that we just had conversation and connectivity, that's when we begin to overcome some of these things. And it's extremely important. But at the end of the day, we all need each other.
That's right. I'm gonna kind of keep this on the men right now, and I'm gonna swing over to Mr. Griffin, I'm gonna swing over to you real quick with my next question. And given your personal experience as a juvenile sentenced to life in prison, what does it look like to incarcerate a teenager with such a long sentence? And what is it like when they return home after serving such a long amount of time, starting from a young age?
Well, I appreciate that, Pastor, and thank you for having me on this most necessary conversation here this evening. I'd like to say hello to all of the panelists, and I appreciate a lot of the comments that have been made thus far. So I work in a few spaces here on the west side of the state of Michigan. One is as a political organizer for criminal justice reform, but in my personal capacity, I am the senior managing partner for 327 Consulting Group here in West Michigan. And I'm formally incarcerated. I was released from incarceration in 2017 after serving 23 years from the time that I was 16 years old. In 1995, I was tried and convicted as a juvenile and sentenced to serve the rest of my natural life in prison for my role in a drug-related homicide in the very community that I am an organizer and an activist now. And I'm glad that you posed that question. A few days ago, I had a conversation where I told a couple quick anecdotes that kind of sums up what you've inquired of. And one is that I had a meeting with a gentleman about a year ago, and I told him my personal story, and he asked me how I survived it. And I asked him what made him think that I did survive 23 years in prison as a juvenile lifer. It's absolutely impossible, taking into consideration both of the statements made by both of the doctors here previously, for anyone to think that they're going to serve upwards 10, 20, 30 years in prison and be the same individual when they're released. One of the nuances of my prison sentence and experience is that at 16 years old, being a more advanced 16-year-old than average, I still was a young kid in so many respects. So I very quickly had to understand how to become a man to raise the boy that I still was. But in all actuality, I was forced to become something animalistic to protect the young man that I was. So I can articulate it in a very colorful way to make it seem as though, I had to grow up very fast to become a man to raise the child that I still was. But in all actuality, prison forces you to become very hypervigilant and violent. And that experience, created an atmosphere where it was necessary for me to evolve into a personality that would be able to protect a growing young child going through that experience. While incarcerated, I organized many groups for college institutions, attended various college institutions while incarcerated. But one of the things that I want to speak to primarily is Dr. Hunt's statements about how men are very reluctant, or we show a lot of trepidation about expressing our emotions regarding the traumas that we've experienced, which is dead on. And so many of us avoid that conversation, even with very close friends and family. And for myself, I just, when she was talking about that, I kind of chuckled, because every day that I wake up, I'm met with anxiety out of this world, and the trepidation that someday, some officer may pull me over and put me back in prison for the rest of my life, because I am still currently on parole supervision for that sentence. I believe that a bill of this nature would do wonders for the demographic of parolee persons here in Michigan. And I believe that it would take a very small contingent of committed individuals that are very innovative and creative to be able to get behind a legislative push like that in this particular state, especially with the heightened attitude and attention towards criminal justice reform that we're seeing over here. Hopefully that answered your question. If not, please let me know.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, man. Oh, no. Thank you. Thank you so much, Rich, for sharing that, man. Yeah, I don't even have nothing to say. I wanna, yeah, man. Thank you for sharing that, man. I'm gonna swing over our question to Glenn now. Glenn, as someone who's experienced incarceration as well firsthand and led the Close Rikers campaign as well, excuse me, as we organize our communities to advocate for a better legal system, what should the public understand about what it looks like for people coming home from jail and prison? Here's where we start getting into activist advocate. What is that thing? You have firsthand experience, Glenn, and you've organized on the ground in this fashion. So what is it that the public needs to know?
Thanks for that question. Just brief introduction. Again, my name is Glenn Martin. I'm a resident of Harlem. I think my most significant credential these days is just being a friend of Shawanna. I really appreciate the work that she's doing, her friendship, her courage, her compassion. I'm not surprised that the bill that she envisioned and helped draft is a holistic bill, that it actually takes correction officers into account. I have a brother who was a correction officer, grew up in poverty like me. 2 brothers went to prison. One became a federal correction officer, and now he's a U.S. Marshal. But he also fought in active wars and has PTSD, and so suffers from some of the issues that we've discussed so far. And why would we be surprised? Because these are issues that affect all people, not just people who've gone to prison, but more specifically, people who have gone to prison are in a unique situation. And some of those things have been named so far, so I won't go through that list again. But I'm really honored to be here. I'm honored to be here with these co-panelists in particular. People have really shared a lot so far that has educated me on an issue that's already been important to me for a really long time. And it's important to me because over the last few years, I've been someone who has been in therapy himself, someone who has struggled with depression, but I came home from prison 20 years ago. And so part of my answer to your question is going to tell a little bit of a story about what it's been like to be out of prison for 20 years and to be tremendously successful in some parts of my life and to suffer in other parts, and mostly to suffer quietly, even though I've been surrounded by tens of thousands of people for a pretty significant portion of my career, whether it's public speaking or on social media and so on. So when I launched the campaign to close Rikers, I really appreciate you pointing to that, because I knew right away that it would be difficult for most New Yorkers to understand what it's like to actually serve time on Rikers. I served time there as a 16-year-old, got stabbed while I was there. I was only there for a couple of days, got stabbed 4 times on that visit, went back, served a year a few years later before I ended up serving 5 more years in state prison. And yet, if you look at the data, while there were large numbers of people going through Rikers and there on any given day, the majority of 9 million people who live in New York City have no clue where Rikers is, even though they fly in and out of LaGuardia Airport. So I started out with the statement that everyone sort of knows me for, which is people closest to the problem are closest to the solution. And so I built a campaign surrounded and uplifted and empowered and fueled by people who had actually served time on Rikers. Why? Because if you're not going to get people to go to Rikers, then you need to find a way to bring Rikers to them. And that was done through the storytelling and hard work and advocacy and organizing of people who had served time on Rikers and been harmed by New York City's Torture Island. One thing I know is that if you look at movement ecology, we did such a great job with shifting the mayor from, you guys are crazy, there's no way we're gonna close Rikers, never gonna happen, even though this island was purchased from like Richard Riker, who's like the head of our courts, who also used to kidnap Black boys at nighttime as part of the kidnap club and bring them in front of the courts and then send them back to the slave-holding South. And here's this progressive mayor with a Black child and a Black wife who couldn't seem to understand why we needed to close a place that was essentially a repository for people in the city who had mental health issues and no access to treatment. It's almost ironic that his wife's core issue is mental health, and that Thrive is like this multi-million-dollar initiative, because the truth is you should always start in the belly of the beast, on the deep end of the pool. And if you want to really address mental health in New York City, you should start with Rikers. But while we were able to educate New Yorkers about the ills of Rikers and how horrible of a place it was, I think the next logical step is much more transparency about jails and prisons. I think more New Yorkers need to literally be actively invited into our criminal justice system, literally to visit the way they do in Europe, where they open up their prison systems twice a year for a week in some places, to have average citizens go through their system and talk to people on the inside, because I think we've done a good job of humanizing people who've done time and come out. But in some ways, if we don't go to the next level and go deeper and further down that lane, what we end up doing, unfortunately, is maybe reinforcing the narrative, which is like some people come out, they do well, they make it, they go on. And I actually hold the reentry industrial complex and philanthropy accountable for that narrative also. And I'll talk a little bit about that before I wrap up. But with respect to policy, since we do have some policymakers here with us, you know, there's the federal IMD exclusion, which happened many, many years ago. It's an outdated discriminatory federal rule that creates these barriers to treatment for adults with severe mental illness. And it was done for all the right reasons, to get rid of our large institutions, the same way we were trying to get rid of Rikers now. 30 years ago, we were trying to get rid of these large mental health institutions that were harming people. And we did this thing called the IMD exclusion. Unfortunately, it means that you can't create new institutions in the community to serve people, because you can only have 16-bed facilities to get Medicaid reimbursement. And that's just all but impossible to achieve an economy of scale with a 16-bed facility. When I worked as vice president at the Fortune Society, we decided we needed to build a mental health service unit inside of the agency. And we were like this $20 million agency, been around since 1969, 210 people on staff. And yet it was extremely difficult for us to build this mental health unit because of the funding structure that allows you to get reimbursed for creating these institutions. So states have to figure out a solution. This bill is part of the solution. But I think states also have to come together and say to the feds that we need to do things differently. And then the last couple of things before I wrap up. I mentioned philanthropy a second ago. I think we spend a lot of time hero worshiping. I think philanthropy rewards heroes who do advocacy work. And I don't think it creates a space for vulnerability. I think that the women have done a great job of particularly pointing out what that is like for men. I think other people on the panel have pointed that out. I think that there is a shame attached to saying what I said earlier in this conversation, that I suffered from depression. And shame is toxic, you know, and it's even more toxic in communities of color. So there's no space for honest discussion. And because we hero worship, as soon as we recognize that someone may be suffering from a mental health issue, we tend to marginalize them and ostracize them, which to me felt eerily similar to actually going to prison. So I think we need to hold ourselves accountable and shine the spotlight on ourselves, philanthropy, the reentry industrial complex, everything else, before we even are able to tell other people what they need to be doing. And then the last thing is, I would just warn us to be careful not to go from criminalizing people to pathologizing people. And I really appreciated Lauren's presentation, because she was talking about people in prison and what they suffer from, but she also talked a lot about people on the outside and was making comparisons back and forth. And I think that helps to eliminate, or at least reduce, the stigma associated with being someone who not only has a criminal record, but has also served time. Anyway, thanks for the opportunity. I hope I didn't go too far over, but I appreciate the question.
No, I thank you very much, Glenn. I appreciate you giving as much context as you did, especially into the Rikers Island, that space. And I appreciate you saying that Rikers Island is the beginning of that post-traumatic prison disorder, because it is. And anybody who's done time knows that it's actually more traumatic on Rikers Island than it is when you get upstate. You know, people actually can't wait to get off of Rikers Island so that things can calm down and they can actually get to a space upstate where they can do their time in peace and in comfort. And that sounds crazy, because you're going up to a prison to be in peace and comfort from another place that's much more worse. So I appreciate you saying that. I want to throw the next question to Arthur, because Arthur Rambert, I think that you're working now at Rikers, and I was hoping that you could tell us what you think people in your program need in terms of mental health services that they are not receiving right now, as we still are dealing with this. And I want to say that and I want to also mention the success of the Close Rikers campaign led by Glenn and in its ability to reduce the jail population at Rikers by half. That was huge, and we definitely have to recognize that. But there's still things that are not being done, you know. So I wanted to just bring in Arthur to tell us a little bit about himself and speak to that a little bit more.
Good evening, everybody. Nice to be here. Thank you, Pastor Isaac. Thank you, Shawanna. Definitely thanks Shawanna for even making me the face of her bill. I appreciate that. My name is Arthur Rambert. I'm a community activist, stakeholder in the community, and I'm about change. I do not presently work on Rikers Island, but I work with Correctional Health Services. So we work with men and women who are coming home from Rikers Island that have mental health, that have behavioral issues. And for me, you know, that starts with also, like the men on the panel, I also served time. I did 25 years. I just came home. I was serving a life sentence at 19, and I got released at 2018. So, you know, the blessing to be here and the opportunity to even work in the field and have the empathy, because men and women who are coming home, the world is already loud, right? So imagine polarizing that times 10 to men and women who have mental health issues. The world is even that louder. And to men and women who are coming home from incarceration, when you actually tell someone that, you know, you're going through something, the biggest thing I heard was, you're free. What could possibly be going wrong? But prison follows you way after you're released. You know, and as the doctor said, we go in with trauma, we receive trauma while we're in there, and we come out with unmitigating trauma and aggression. Like I myself, it took me 7 months before I could even sleep with the light off, right? So when I see men and women coming that I deal with that are coming home, the key issue is to not just medicate them, because oftentimes doctors just want to medicate the issue and not deal with the roots of the problem, right? The root issue of why this man or woman has these mental issues. You know, so the key is, for me, from what I see, is to have, you know, those who are on Rikers Island, the discharge planners, not just sign them out and send them home, because most men and women are coming home having been diagnosed the first time on Rikers Island. So you're in an abnormal situation being told that you have this diagnosis in a place where you're not even supposed, where the abnormal has become normal. And then we come home and the world frowns, as they said, frowns upon those of us who have mental health issues. And mental health is almost like an infectious disease. No one wants to face the problem. So the first thing that has to be injected into the core issue is empathy. You have to see it has to become a humane issue. We have to see each other as humane, because a lot of us didn't go in with these problems. You know, or a lot of us didn't know that we had these problems. So when I deal and I interact with men and women that are coming home, and I hear their remorse, and I hear their stories, it's like I want to share a common goal or commonality with them to let them know that I understand. You know, not just that we want to get you on this medication, but have a program that coexists, that they can feel humane alongside of taking the medication. Because once they're released from Rikers Island, many don't even go to receive or take the medication. They don't have the insurance to get the medication. So now we're thrust and we're released into the population, into the world with a mental health issue. We don't have the proper insurance to get the medication. And we're afraid to go tell someone that we need help. So it's a tantamount of issues. And how we have to deal and face these issues is that we have to sit and just look across from the individual that we're dealing with and see ourselves in them and have compassion. That's the biggest thing that I think a lot of people who are in these positions to help, they lack the opportunity, because some people are just in these positions for a job, you know, and I'm just saying some people, but I know and understand this. that it's hard to go sit in front of someone and share your story and then have that person say, well, I'm gonna take your name and send you to somebody else. Now you gotta tell your story over again, and people shy away from, already suffer from trust issues. So now I just told you my story, you're gonna send me to another office to tell my story, and then that person's gonna send me to another office. So I think there has to be a sense of uniformity in this system and accountability that allows the individual who is dealing one-on-one with the person who has these, with the client or patient that has these issues, one-on-one, and form a relationship. And that person should have the opportunity to walk him or her through, through the phases and steps. Because again, mental health just doesn't change overnight. And again, men and women are going to wake up with these issues day in and day out. So at the end of the day, for me, I just strive to pour a lot of empathy and not just medicate the people. Because if you medicate the population, then that's a whole nother issue. And nobody benefits from that but the medical profession, and the big pharmaceutical companies. So I think we have to just inject empathy and see each other as humane and recognize that a lot of these issues, like the doctor said, have a root. You don't blame, the leaves, you got to go to the root. So let's deal with the root, and then that way it all formulates around empathy and trust. Because like they said, when someone trusts you, they will share with you why it is what they're going through. Thank you.
Thank you, man. Thank you very much, Arthur. I appreciate that. For the sake of time, I'm sorry, I haven't been like snapping it up or clapping it between each speaker, but I everything that everybody has said, it has touched me deeply. So I apologize if I'm just swinging through this. I'm not in any way missing any of this. This is like profound stuff. And I'm also looking at the comments in the Facebook group, and folks are responding to this very well. This is a topic that it seems like needed to be discussed that hasn't been talked about. So I'm really appreciative of that. We have 2 more speakers left on the first round of questioning. And looking at the time, our second round of questioning will be just like everyone will be asked a question and go for 1 minute. And then we'll sort of open it up to some of the questions that are coming in, and we'll do our best to complete at the 8 o'clock hour, so we're not holding people past obligations. So the next question I want to pose is to Anastasia Schmid. I wanted to ask you, we just heard a lot, and I wanted to ask you, what mental wellness practices can be put in place as it relates to stress management for women and men who have experienced incarceration? What are some things that they can do on their own?
Hi, I'm so happy to be here. I'm honored to be part of this panel. So let me just give a minute to introduce myself a little bit more. My name is Anastasia. I'm an artist and an activist. I'm a graduate of IUPUI's Graduate Medical Humanities program and a candidate for UC Riverside Ethnic Studies. I'm also a part of a history collective. I'm rewriting the history of women's institutions and prisons in the state of Indiana. And my area of expertise is medicalization of women's bodies, gender and sexuality issues. I'm formerly incarcerated. I spent nearly 19 years behind bars on a wrongful conviction. I am also a trauma survivor. I have complex PTSD. That was indeed the reason behind why the crime happened in the first place. And now I absolutely recognize what Shawanna brings forth with post-traumatic prison disorder. It was such an honor to meet her a couple of months back and to find somebody who had finally articulated a name for what myself and so many other people are experiencing. So as a trauma survivor myself, and going into the system and finding the system was further traumatizing me, what I started to realize was a lifetime of systemic failure where I in my life was concerned. I had been failed by modern medicine, I had been failed by communities, I had been failed pretty much across the board. And I had found that the very people that are purported to protect and to serve and to help you were actually the people that were inflicting more harm, the worst amount of harm, and layered levels of trauma. And so through this continued experience of harm, and harm particularly coming from sources that are supposed to help you, we start to self-impose silence. And self-imposing silence is only going to exacerbate the problem. So after I was in prison, I began the long, arduous journey of trying to figure out exactly what was the core and the nature of the issues and the symptoms that I was experiencing. And so I began this fearless journey of self-discovery, following patterns in my life, becoming fearlessly and raw honest with myself about each and every aspect of my life. And through this process, I also decided to start getting deeper into my education. I went back to school, and I pretty much tailored my entire college career around trying to figure out the answers to the problems that I was experiencing and so many of the other women around me were experiencing, in addition to the problems that my previous victimizers seemed to display. Like, what were the commonalities and what were the threads? And, you know, I kept hearing repeatedly through the system this idea of individual responsibility and individual accountability and individual rehabilitation. And what I found is, why that's pertinent to a point, we sell ourselves short with that because there are systemic problems and we lack systemic alleviations to much larger problems. So what I began to do was tailor programs, number one, that were going to address the issues I have and help myself, but also we're going to be able to help other people. And I think I've heard several other people on this panel mention it, and I think it's imperative. Top of that list is support. We have got to have a community network of support. And it is so important that in that support network, we have people that have been directly impacted by whatever situation or circumstance it is that we're talking about. You know, and that's what I found another problem to be. So many programs had been designed by people removed and separate and outside of the problem itself. And what other people think is needed and what's actually needed, I came to find are two very different things. So I'm a yoga instructor as well as many other things. And I found, you know, somebody else on the panel had already mentioned yoga and meditation. I think when we're talking about trauma in any regard, it's imperative. We have to get back to a mind, body, soul connection with ourselves and with that connection with community and others. And I found that that is a crucial way to do that. It's become one of the number one ways for me as a trauma survivor to reclaim my own body, reclaim my own personhood, find comfort within my own skin. And I think when we're talking about complex and multiple traumas, this is one of the core problems, particularly for people who have been incarcerated. You have been dehumanized to the point that you are no longer comfortable in your own skin. So when my own body is no longer my home and I no longer feel safe in my own body, how can I begin to feel safe in the world at large or in my community or any other environment I find myself in? So that's one of the tops of my list. Like so many of you, I am an artist, and art to me is the ultimate form of expression. Art, whether it's spoken word poetry or painting or collage or sculpture or performance art, music, dance, whatever your performance and your art takes on, it's that expression of the internal. And for me, sometimes art has become the piece that has been the revelation of the thing that could not be spoken. You know, so many of these traumas we experience, we don't talk about them. We're shameful, we're guilty, we're fearful. And somebody else on the panel had said, you know, there's an adage in Black homes that what happens in the home stays in the home. Well, I'm here to tell you that's not just the Black home, that's also the white affluent home. You know, in the white affluent home, we're not going to talk about it because God forbid the embarrassment and the shame to the high ups and the elites. We don't ever want to do that, so we don't talk about that either. And again, I think it ties right back into systemic problems. This picture is so much bigger than just any one individual or any one community. So, you know, I'm a practicer of visualization, and I think we can do that individually, we can do that collectively, but for me, visualizing has become key, not only to work through my own issues of trauma, but also to work through what I'm going to do to be successful. We have to be able to see what it is we want out of life in order to attain it. And I think when you're a victim of trauma and multiple traumas, you get so trapped in the mindset of thinking about the horrible that you can't foresee anything beyond the horrible. And so it's about retraining the mind to look at something positive, to look forward to a future, to reimagine, to re-articulate what we want our lives to be. And this is why I absolutely am dead set against rehashing over and over and over again details of the trauma that we've survived. What it does is it triggers you, and it keeps you trapped in a negative mindset, and it keeps you trapped in a system of fear. So I think overall we take all of these things holistically, and that really is the key. How do we work together on all levels to come at each other from a point of awareness and understanding, from a point of compassion, but most of all from a position of love, self-love and love for one another.
You guys are warming my heart so much. Everything, you know, that needed to be said is being said right now. You guys are we home runs, and just looking at the feedback that's coming through, people are getting it. It's resonating with them. So, you know, these questions, next set of questions, we're gonna get our last question on the first round from Phil, but this question and the rest of them start to go in that direction of what needs to happen. You know, so let's keep that framing in mind, what needs to happen. Phil, I reshaped the question that I originally sent you a little bit, but I wanted to tell you what you put in the comment box was exactly what everyone needed to hear. So if you could give us that, but the question I'm going to ask you is, what changes need to be made on a grassroots organizing level with community organizations that you work with in order to make this bill a reality? What organizations you work with and beyond? What needs to happen on the ground at that grassroots level to make this bill a reality?
Well, thank you very much, Pastor Isaac. I hope you folks can hear me all right. Great. My name is Phil Giltner. I work for Senator Brian Benjamin, who represents Harlem. And for those people who aren't from the city, they might not know, he represents Harlem, Upper Manhattan, Northern Manhattan. And he's very, very keen on issues related to criminal justice reform and to racial and social justice. So this is sort of how I got into the mix of things. My job is I take whatever Senator Benjamin's priorities are and see how we get them into law. And part of also what I do is I kind of work as the person who brings in the information from the various people he might meet with, and then find ways to make laws on this. And that's how I met Shawanna. That's how I found out about Shawanna's law. I think it's just terrific. I think we're going to go somewhere with this. Your question, Pastor Isaac, first of all, thank you very much for hosting us tonight. I think it's terrific. I wanted to say what we're doing right now is what you should be doing, all right? Partly you have to build your community among yourselves, to build the network. But the biggest thing I see in my work every day in the state legislature, I can meet 13, 14, 15 different groups ranging from, you know, bankers to college presidents to criminal justice reform to rent units to all over the place. And there's a huge sort of tidal wave of information that comes our way every single day. And so what you have to do as a grassroots movement is you have to make sure that your message is getting out there, because there's so much noise. You have to break through the noise. And this is what you're doing by making a coherent, clear story that people understand. The whole issue that the sort of Shawanna's law raises, this post-prison traumatic disorder raises, is really central to what's wrong with the correctional system in America. In America, and of course I only really work in New York, but from what I understand of what happens across the country, is that the system is cooked up in a way that says, they're going to lock you up, and it's your problem from now on. You figure it out. You know, when it comes to mental health treatments, you know, New York State, yes, they have, and corrections, they have mental health people. But really, the insiders tell me the only thing they want to make sure is you don't kill yourself. Beyond that, they don't give a damn. And so what we need to do is we have to really find a way to make it so that when people are incarcerated, that we are helping them. They are helping them to build their lives to be able to come out, because there is, despite the public has no understanding of the fact that when people get out, they are really just let out. There's no real system. Everybody has this sort of Hollywood idea that you come out, you come to a halfway, if you're lucky, you come to like a portion society, and they'll take care of you. You know, they have some counseling and everything else. But the vast majority of people, they get nothing, and people don't know that. And I think if people did know that, they would absolutely be just apoplectic, because there is nothing to help people to get their lives together. It's simply they throw you in the system and they just leave you there. And it's our job with legislation like this to fix that. And this is just one piece of the puzzle that we're going to fix. You know, the mental health counseling, whether it be for trauma, as you said, trauma, and it's either whether you went into the system with trauma, you're traumatized by the system, you're traumatized by being thrown out of the system. That's what we're trying to fix. But we have to fix it by working together, by getting the message out, being clear, and making sure we have a clear message that breaks through the noise.
That's right. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Phil. We got to break through the noise. I like that, this idea of a shared message. And I think, I don't think I know, and I agree with that 100%, in that if there were to be some unity, how powerful would we be? You know, one of the things I don't want to touch too much on what's going on right now, but I want to point out that there's power in unity and coming together with a shared message. The police force in this country have not been used to fighting Black people and white people together. They are used to only beating up Black people in the streets and terrorizing us. Now that they have, you know, white people alongside of Black people that they have to fight, they haven't planned for that. They never expected that, you know, white people would actually see the nonsense behind white supremacy and all of that. And, you know, so I just want to speak. I don't want to get too deep into that because that's another conversation.
That's a great conversation, though, as it is.
Yeah, I definitely want to just say thank you, Phil, for saying that, because unity, shared message. Let's think about that. And I muted myself. That's another thing that Shawanna says. You know, I think that comes from some of the spirit of what who Shawanna is and why I love her so much, because she's like, listen, we all here to do the same work. We all here to do the same thing. And, you know, we don't got time for all the nonsense, the egos, the tripping on this and tripping on that. And it's like, can we get this work done? You know, so I appreciate that. So that's amazing. I want to swing back on over to Dr. Hunt. Are you here with me, Dr. Hunt? Yeah. Yes. And
I'm with you.
Okay, great. And then I'm going to swing over to you again, Stephanie, given the time, and I apologize. What changes can be made immediately, Doctor, at an institutional and departmental level to create a more trauma-informed and cultivating environment for all genders incarcerated today?
Okay, well, you know, how I would begin is by saying what we don't repair, we will repeat, right? And so what we have been doing for the longest time is treating symptoms and not the root of the problem. And so what it entails to treat the root of the problem with all of these systems is real trauma-informed care. We need training. You know, it's interesting. I train with members of Homeland Security, NYPD. I've trained clinicians. I've trained social workers and case managers. And it's interesting to me that they really don't know the definition of real trauma-informed care. And so how are you treating if you don't know what you're supposed to be treating? And so that's a downfall with the system, that they have this blanket one size fits all or one size fits most type of you know, way to go about it. I personally don't believe in treatment. I believe in healing. I believe that we should move from a place of just, you know, pushing pills across the table or just seeing people as numbers or as labeling them as felons and seeing that there's a human that's across the table from me. There's a human that I have to give a service to. There is some person that's in front of me that the mother carried for 9 months. There is some person that regardless of the behavior they may have showed, they're still a person, and they deserve a second chance. Biases to cater to individuals. And that comes into proper training. It comes in taking a trauma-informed approach that realizes the effect of trauma, that recognizes the signs and the symptoms of trauma, respond with trauma with best practices, and also resist re-traumatizing people. Because the last thing that an individual needs is to be re-traumatized when they're seeking help. And that's what our systems have been doing. You know, there's a saying by author Parker Palmer, and he says, if you are with us unfaithfully, you're doing terrible damage. And for so long, we have been doing terrible damage, where we have 8.2 million individuals dealing with mental illness, yet only 48.1 really receive any type of treatment. And that treatment may not even be healing treatment. So when we are looking at a broader scale, and I appreciate, you know, Phil, for bringing to the table the heart of Senator Benjamin, because I've had the opportunity to work with him. When we passed the End Child Sex Trafficking Bill back in 2018, and the governor signed it into law. So I know what it entails. And I know that for sure that senator is one that is propelled towards, you know, seeing our community blossom into the beautiful canvas that it can be. So we have to do training. No correctional officer should go without proper training. No president of an organization should go without trauma training. No police officer should be walking the beat without trauma training. And that trauma training, no lawyer, no doctor like myself. You know, what people don't understand is a lot of times when you're studying to be a psychologist, a psychiatrist, when you're studying to be a social worker, case manager, you get one chapter of trauma-informed training. One chapter to transform a life is not enough. And so we need consistent and productive training. We need to see individuals as though they are worthy to be here, whether they committed a crime or not, whether to some people they're innocent or not. You know what you were before you were any titles that man gave you? You were just a human being who deserved to be on the earth. And until we start to see that that's exactly who people are, they're human, they deserve empathy, compassion, and love. That is what we need to bring to the table, and with that, implement it with proper training so that we can actually see lives change for the better. So that is what I feel we need to do moving forward. As clinicians and as members of the society, we need to educate each other. We need to reprogram all the mess that we've been taught about people of different cultures, and change the culture of the system, change the culture and the climate of our state so that people can have a place to have their souls show up and be magnified for the wonderful people individually that they are. That's my answer.
Oh man.
I'm over here.
Oh man. Doctor.
Said it.
Thank you.
She said it.
I know, right? Just like
she said it. Like, I don't even know what question are you going to ask me, because she said it. I'm over here typing the 4 powerful R's, and my hands are sweaty because Shawanna knows that this is what I talk about. I am not a psychologist, but I am a mental health advocate. I am certified in trauma-informed care. I educated in the schools. My 9-to-5 job right now, I run programs in 2 women and children shelters in Harlem. I work for WIN, Women in Need. That is a huge population dealing with trauma, but this is trauma-informed care. This is what we're talking about from the schools on down. I always say this, it doesn't matter from the lunchroom workers to the school safety officers, everyone, it needs to be mandated. Talking about it needs to be mandated trauma-informed care. it starts, we know about the school to prison pipeline because it starts in the schools. It starts right there. We talked about the age of suicide. The signs and symptoms of depression and anxiety and PTSD, they start as early as age 5 years old. That's why children are committing suicide. So from the educators have to be trauma informed. Right, March 5th, right before the shelter in place and everything happened with the pandemic, I just created a 90-minute workshop called Trauma Informed Parents in Schools with the acronyms TIPS, and had an opportunity to present it at St. John's University for the Education Revolutionary Conference. We brought together over 800 educators from across the country. And something that Dr. Hunt said was so profound, because I had 30 educators in my classroom at a time that took this 90-minute workshop, right? And I'm talking about from superintendents to principals to educators, and every last one of them, like she said, although they had received maybe a little bit of training and may have heard about trauma and heard the term trauma-informed care, when I asked, all of them raised their hands when they said they've heard the term and knew maybe a little bit about the definition. But when I asked the question if they felt like they were trained and equipped and had enough knowledge and know-how to properly make sure that their classrooms were based around a trauma-informed framework and structure to support all children, inclusive of everyone, the ones that were dealing with trauma, the ones that had learning disability, every single person, guess what? All the way down to the superintendent. Now, one person in the room raised their hand and felt like they were equipped enough. So what she said was profound. Trauma-informed care is necessary all the way across the board in all of these systems, or else there will never be healing. And like she said, it is about the healing, the wholeness of the person, mind, body, and spirit. And it will only happen when all of these institutions are mandated for their framework and organizational structure to be based around trauma-informed care.
You was the next person I was gonna call.
Sorry, like I'm over here just like, whew.
Yeah, you look, I was calling on you next anyway, so I was just like, go for it. Because Dr. Hunt said something that you mentioned on the phone earlier, that there's no one size fits all here. And that was the question I was gonna ask you about it, and tell us a little bit more about that. But could you in 30 seconds just elaborate a little bit more on that, what you mean when you say there's no one size fits all, when we start to think about trauma-informed care and shaping these practices, because you start to get to researchers and I've seen it at Columbia, and everything becomes a blanket and everything applies to everybody. You know, so
the reason why I said there's no one size fits all when we had the conversation on the phone is because, and I know Dr. Hunt can know exactly what I'm saying, the effects of trauma looks different for everybody. So one person could have gone through the same situation. Shawanna could have experienced it, Lauren, Arthur, and Dr. Hunt could have experienced it, and Glenn, and everybody's response and reaction to it will have been different. Shawanna may look like she was just not even affected by it, although she may look like, behavioral wise, or the way she expressed it, that she wasn't affected at all. Dr. Hunt may look like it completely broke her down and she needs a whole bunch of therapy and healing. And, Glenn may look like, it happened, but he's able to deal with it and still continue on. So it shows up differently. So that's why when we talk about preparing for when, for the families and when they come home, it's different. It's going to affect, it's going to look different for everybody. So the plan, there is no one size fits all. So there's so many things that goes into that. What is the family structure? What happens inside of the household? What conversations were happening? How was the communication and the connection with this person or this family member when they were incarcerated? What kind of plan was set when they came home? So that's when we were talking about, like for Shawanna's bill, when we're talking about plans and things and support that needs to be set in place when the person is incarcerated, for that person, for their family, because when the person goes to jail, their family goes to jail too, and people don't realize that either. So what's happening? What's the plan and support looking like while that's happening when that person is incarcerated, preparing for the person's release to come home, and then once that person is finally out and released.
Thank you so much, Stephanie, for that. Thank you.
And listen, I'm sorry, guys. I have to jump off. I wanted to stay on so bad for the last 15 minutes. I have to get ready for the show. Shawanna, I love you. Pastor Scott, thank you so much for being an awesome moderator. Every single person that I've had an opportunity to meet via this Zoom, I'm sending love and light this was an awesome platform, and I look forward to continuing to build with each and every one of you, Shawanna. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. That's right. Thank you, Steph. So I want to swing the next question over to Representative Jones, and I want to say, what steps, and this is a little tailored to your region, and what steps are being taken in Michigan to pass this bill and bills that advocate for better mental health resources for people who endured short and long-term incarceration? And what is that message? This is like the biggest part of that. What is that message that you want to give to other assembly members about post-traumatic prison disorder?
Well, I think right now the biggest key is reaching out not only to my colleagues but also to some of the other office holders across the state, and not just from our particular office, but I know we're working with some folks that are actually behind the bars right now, doing letter writing campaigns, sharing a little bit about themselves and what the post-traumatic prison disorder really is. For those who are still in it currently and some people who made it out. I think that's the key, sharing some of those stories and those messages with people so they can really have their eyes open up to see, hey, this is a real thing. I think that's currently the place that we're at right now, with some information sharing. But I think personally for me, I think that this is a critical issue, especially for folk that I know some folk that are close to me that were in solitary confinement or might get some kind of abuse from the COs or just constant barraging from people that are supposed to maybe from the parole board or different things like that from the institution or whatnot, and that stuff makes the disorder even worse. And having conversations with them all the time when they have these inklings of hope and constantly don't get a chance to really move forward. I think that's been a major task, not only, for me trying to go ahead and I haven't, I've never served time before. So I'm kind of in this bubble trying to figure out how do I maintain the open line of conversation with them and, keep the family kind of optimistic and also keep the person optimistic, but being realistic at the same time on exactly what's going to happen. And so I think this opens up the door for us to help heal some folk, but also for us to help get some people from behind bars and to make sure people don't return as well. Because if we can create some kind of program or some kind of blueprint for a way to make sure that people, the same way that people take classes and get a skill, this can be another route to help some of our brothers and sisters come back and reintegrate back into society.
Thank you. And what's the word in Michigan and what's happening with the bill?
So we're still in the phases. So of course we know the world fell apart not too long ago. So we've been doing a lot of appropriation related legislation. We're just not getting back onto the policy piece. So things have been moving a little slow, but this piece of legislation as well as some other legislation is going to be forthcoming, getting kicked off into the committees. And so now we're slowly getting back up to the point where we can go ahead and get it in the committees. And what the process looks like, that it gets introduced, goes to the committees, and now we have a buffer committee as well called Ways and Means. So it'll go to one committee, then it goes to the Ways and Means committee, then it comes to House floor. After we take care of it, we kick it over to the Senate side, and then if they need to clean anything up and send it back, they will. If not, they'll kick it to the governor's desk, and the executive is showing support of this legislation. Because someone mentioned earlier, I think it was Rich, that right now Michigan the appetite for criminal justice reform is present right now in Michigan. So right now is the perfect time to get this moving.
Perfect. So I'm gonna thank you, Assemblyman. I'm gonna throw my next question on over to Glenn. We got about 10 minutes. I don't think that we're gonna get to the public's questions, but I'm going to work with Shawanna to somehow get these questions answered by the panelists, and maybe we'll have it up on the website or something. I'm sure that they have so much more to say, but for the sake of time and respecting that we're at home and we want to chill out, it's 8 o'clock at night. I don't want to keep us past the time that we should be going. But my next question is to you, Glenn. It's sort of the same one I asked Dr. Hunt, but more. She came at it from trauma-informed psychological lens, and forgive me if I'm putting you in this box of being a campaigner, and a great one at that, but I wanted you to sort of answer the same question with that lens on. What changes can be made immediately at an institutional and departmental level to create a more trauma-informed and cultivating environment for all genders incarcerated today? And what factors need to be put in place to prepare for people returning to communities after short and long-term incarceration? That's a long one, but I know you could tackle that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question. And actually, I think I'm going to give you some of your time back because I'm going to use the sharp end of the axe in my response. I racked my brain thinking of short-term, immediate solutions to where we are now, given the types of institutions that we have to work with. When I launched the Close Rikers campaign, some of my biggest opposition came from social service reentry organizations that were in relationship with Rikers and heavily funded by Rikers. And everyone said that it was a really bold and audacious move to suggest that Rikers could even close. But I appreciate the kudos you gave, not just to me, but to all the formerly incarcerated people and others who helped make it happen to go from 11,000 to 5,000. And what it reminds me is that if you start out with bold and audacious, wherever you land, you're going to be doing a lot better than if you start out with incrementalism. And so, to be quite honest, when I think about what to do with the system we currently have, the only answer I could come up with is that we should drown the whole goddamn thing in the bathtub. Like, I've become very much an abolitionist, particularly as I've gone through my own journey through mental health treatment, because I've seen how people on the outside show up. I mean, I'm a business owner. I run a couple of businesses, one of them with $4 million in assets, and I'm lucky enough to have access to treatment now and to go to therapy. But the truth is, I've seen what the stigma looks like on the outside for someone in such a privileged position as the one that I'm in now. And I just don't know how we take an institution that is so toxic and so paramilitary and so hyper-masculine and get it to suddenly be compassionate. And so I'm supporting Shawanna because I believe in her vision and the work she's doing to support people who are currently in the system that we're in. But I think as a community, as a city, as a state, we need to be super bold, super audacious, have abolition on the horizon, and call it for what it is, which is an institution that doesn't work and that was built to cause additional harm, and that will be difficult to turn it 180 degrees to get it to behave any differently. And, in court, when people get sentenced, they're knocked down a few levels and we devalue them, and there's no equal ceremony to bring people back up. And when you think about criminal justice system, that is essentially how it operates. It takes away people's humanity, and there's no moment to suggest that people are human and that they deserve treatment and that they deserve compassion. So I'm sorry that I'm sort of being so big picture in my response, but sharp end of the axe says to me that we should just drown the whole goddamn thing in the bathtub and start from scratch.
Hey, man, some things can't be reformed, right? Some things can't be reformed. Some things have to be completely overhauled, so I can, I feel you on that. So I'm going to swing, we got a few more minutes. I'm going to swing my next question over to you, Rich. And my question is, given your experience, and also, knowing about what incarceration does to, yourself and what it can do to the lives of others, how important is it to that folks receive mental health services, but also alongside that economical and social support post-incarceration? How important are those three things together? Because we're talking a lot about just the psychological support.
Yeah, I mean, it's extremely important, but even before release, institutions here in Michigan have various programs and facilities that offer clinicians and therapists alike. But the culture of incarceration doesn't even allow these folks to do their job. I have a very good friend who is a social worker who works in the Department of Corrections in a southern state. And she sent me a text an hour before we got on this call to let me know that she quit today because she can't do her job. It's impossible for her to be as useful and resourceful to the people that are there. So I don't want to deviate from your question, but to kind of answer it, to speak to Glenn's point, the sharp end of the axe is abolition and not reform. Incarceration institutions are slave plantations, period. It is an extension of slavery. It's not the new slavery. It's not reformed slavery. It is the exact same machine that we have allowed America to tell us we need to protect ourselves from citizens that they've criminalized and demonized. We haven't done that. So I don't know about reforming a system and providing opportunities for therapists and clinicians to be present to help those folks transition in an abolitionist standpoint. But I will say that it's extremely detrimental if it's not there. Me coming out of incarceration 2.5 years ago, I still have yet to have a therapist, based on trepidation, but also based on just, trust factors in certain communities where the stigma of in the Black community is that, mental health is a negative, has a negative calling with it. But to the economical piece as well, nobody's coming out of prison with sound economic intelligence. There's nothing programmatically that would suggest that an institution that wants to receive monetary compensation for incarcerating or housing you would then provide you with the wherewithal to go out and to be a successful pro-social person. That flies in the face of what that institution is created for. Is it necessary? Yes. Are we going to get it asking for reforms to that system? No, definitely not.
Thank you, Rich. That was a perfect follow-up. So we got 3 last speakers to just to finish out our second round, and I appreciate everybody for hanging on. And this conversation is so rich. Like, there's so much information here. There's so much that can be taken for, the person who is experiencing that trauma, for the person who's in a place where they can make some real trauma-informed change. I would definitely encourage anybody who works in the field of being trauma-informed to please just reach out to Dr. Hunt. Don't even think you know how to do it on your own. Reach out to her, because she knows what she's talking about. You understand what I'm saying? Because that was it. And everything everyone has been saying after that has been so rich in exactly what's been needed to be said for years. So I'm going to get on to the next speaker. I'm going to ask you, Arthur, as we think about shaping new programs and new things, even abolition, could you speak a little bit about how generational sort of impacts of incarceration show up in different areas? How do they show up in raising a child? How would they show up in, trying to get a job post-incarceration, or even during incarceration? Because like Dr. Hunt said, sometimes we come in with trauma. And for Black people, we all come in with trauma, So yeah, was I clear on that, big bro?
Yes, you were clear. First and foremost, in a lot of the areas that we come from, prison was made to be a rites of passage. So if you didn't even go to prison, at least in the area I came from, you were looked at as you weren't real. You didn't have a prison pass. It's definitely impossible to raise a child from a visiting room. The worst thing you want to hear is when you're in the visiting room and you see children, little boys and girls saying that they want to stay here. They want to stay with mommy or daddy, not knowing exactly where they're at. Silence is loud and it makes no mistake. So if you're not saying nothing, you're saying something. So even when you're coming home, the generational impact is that the crack era took a lot of men and women out of the era to even be mothers and fathers. So
it's 8 o'clock.
Certain areas where the system took care of the children. So, very much so, the generational impact is passed on until we become knowledgeable of the system, as Mr. Martin said, and we tear it down and we come home and we not reform, but we refine ourselves, and then we build a refined system. That's how I see that.
Copy. So I'm going to go over to you. Thank you, big bro. Thank you, man. I appreciate you and your wisdom, man. I was extremely happy to have you on the line, in particular, because I love the fire that I saw from the moment that I met you when you first came home. So I appreciate those words, big bro. So I want to swing my next question over to Phil. Then Anastasia, I'm going to let you end us off. My question to you, Phil, is what should advocates know about the business and monetization of legislation? What financial components need to come together to make this bill pass?
Oh boy, that's all you got?
Yeah, that's it.
The issue really behind all this, and this is like they always say, in poli-sci 101, is who's going to pay, right? The biggest problem is in America, as we know, there's plenty of money to hurt people, there's plenty of money to lock them up, but there's not enough money to fix them. You see that this is the issue, and this is one of the things that we're going to have to face in New York State as we build a system that really does help people when they get out, help them prepare to get out, is that it takes trained professionals, not somebody who's just going to write you a prescription and give you a pill and hope you're going to go away. It's going to be people who can spend time with you to help you, to get you through what you need to do, and that costs money. And that's always the problem. To do this right in New York State will cost millions and millions of dollars, but it's the right thing to do. The problem we face always in government is, should you do something because it's right or because it's cheap? And I always want to come down and say, well, I gotta do what's right. The question is, you gotta pay for it.
Thank you for that wisdom, Phil. Thank you for that wisdom. I appreciate you, man. So Anastasia, I'm gonna let you take us home. And my question more sort of is going into the I think all the practitioners, professionals who are in places to make change, I think all of you have already heard enough to get going. I got a lot of my non-Black friends checking in like, hey, what can I do? What can I do? If you just listen to this discussion, you know now what you can do. Use your privilege to make the change in a very trauma-informed way. And I understand what that is. But my question to Anastasia is more, I think I heard, because my pastor senses heard something about spirituality as you were talking about, your own walk and how you were able to find coping mechanisms for yourself due to your own experience. And I wanted to know, how has your spirituality impacted your own capacity to sort of heal? And then also, what would you say to that woman or man right now who is experiencing trauma? We want to talk to the person right now who's experiencing trauma, who's listening to this whole conversation, and who knows already everything we're saying. We might put some things in context for them. That pain, trauma, they know that. So what words would you give them?
You cut out on me, Rick.
Are you here?
You were cutting out on me. Can you hear me?
Yes. Did I cut out on everybody? Did y'all all hear me?
Can you hear me?
Okay, yeah. I can hear you.
You were cutting out on me at the very end there.
Oh, okay. I was just saying, what do you say to that person
So
at home?
what I would say,
Okay. Is that me?
yeah, you keep phrasing up on me, but I think I get the gist of your question if you can hear me.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so what I would say, and this is to all people, not just to those who are experiencing trauma, but I believe we are spiritual beings having a human experience. We are a piece of that divine creator and that divine creation before we are anything else. And so I think no matter what your spiritual path is, every religion I have studied, and I've studied many religions, comes back to what we always want to call the capital T truth. And I think that if we are to heal as a people, if we are to heal as individuals, if we are to heal as a society, we have got to get to capital T truth. We've got to stop talking this rhetoric, and we have to start talking the reality. We have to fearlessly speak the truth of our existence and our experience and what's happening. I've become so infuriated in current times when I keep hearing politicians and people talk about let's make America great again. When was it great? We are a country founded on genocide and slavery, and we have continued to do that. So I'm hats off to Glenn and Richard speaking on abolition. You cannot reform a system that was founded and sustained on violence. We will never reform that. So we have to get to the truth of the violence behind these systems to begin with, before we can ever hope to heal as individuals and as a society at whole. So what I would say to the person that's in the midst of trauma is that sometimes we have to go within. You have to go into your own heart, not your mind, but into your heart, back to the core of who you are at your origin and your essence. And that is, you were designed for greatness. You were designed to be whole and healthy and healed and well. You are perfect. Even in your imperfection, you are perfect. And so we must reach into that core of that divine creation that we are all so intimately a part of. We need to find it in ourselves, and we need to find it within ourselves to see it within each other and reach out within to one another from that sense of light and love and wholeness. So with that, I thank you so much for allowing me to be part of this panel today. I love all of you. I'm sending my love and my light out to everyone who's listening today. And in the words of the yogini that I am, namaste.
Thank you so much, Anastasia, and I'm sorry about the connection. So Shawanna, I want to turn it over to you for some words, but you said that we can take a question. If folks are willing to stay on to take a question or two, then I'm definitely going to ask it. So I'm going to go through some of what I see here. The first question is, and I think this is the question I could probably answer real quick. The first question is, how can the arts support the pursuit of passing this bill, mental health needs of individuals? I think the arts plays a dual role. The arts plays a role that it can be that tool by which you are able to heal through your trauma and make it through, and be able to mentally cope with what you're going through. But also the arts has the power to change the hearts and minds of the people who are in the positions to make the change. And if you look at the work that the Confined Arts has been doing, we've been harnessing that idea right there, and that we can make change through the arts. And perhaps it's not sitting at this panel discussion. Perhaps it's through a poetry piece. Perhaps it's through a film that you need to see. Perhaps it's through a spoken word piece or some sort of other media that will help you to get it. You know, so that is the role that the arts can play in being a strategic tool in shaping the hearts and minds of people. So I'm gonna go to the next question. Looking at the bill as it is written, what would you add? And I'm going to leave that question open to anybody. You can unmute yourself and answer. To anybody who read the full bill?
This is Rich. I think I don't know if there's a need to add a whole lot, but one thing that you know, speaks to some of the points that have been made here this evening are the historical context of trauma and the experience of incarceration in the historical context of slavery. I think that post-traumatic prison disorder is right in alignment with post-traumatic slave disorders because they're the same reality. It's the same trauma. Even the trauma that we experience on a day-to-day basis with local police agencies. It is absurd to believe that being approached by a police officer who has been militarized to police the community, which is an organization that is rooted in slavery and genocide, it's just absolutely impossible not to include the historical context of that institution of slavery as it is meted out in our modern day version of it.
Cool. Thank you, Rich. So I'm gonna go to the next question. The next question is a really good one, I think. If this bill is passed, how can we ensure that the government is effectively evaluating and improving mental health services? How can we hold them accountable?
So
that's open to the floor.
So can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. So my solution for accountability was vendor services. We are clear that if we allow DOC and BOP to be in charge of anything, they will for a lack of better words, they just will not do a good job. They've not done a good job thus far with any services that they've offered. So I'm asking for vendor services. And that's one of the things that I'm pressing with Dr. Carol Ann Hunt. And because, as you can see, she's amazing. And you know, Stephanie's amazing. And it is these women that are trauma informed, that are clear about mass incarceration and multicolors and just pain. These are the people that I want vendored in prisons, that will take you and help to frame you in a better way to come home. Or if you're post-incarcerated, will frame you for sustainability to be functional. And I think it is important that vendored therapy is spoken and it is not left in the hands of DOC and BOP. Absolutely not. I want to take therapy out of their hands because they have no clue other than to be punitive, what therapy even looks like. So how can you give someone a tool that doesn't know what it is?
Thank you, Shawanna.
That's just not their business, right? That they don't know what they're doing, and Shawanna's exactly put her finger right on it. You have to have people who are professionals, who know what they're doing, who are committed and do it, and you have to stay on top of it, because if you just set it up once and forget about it, it goes away. You have to stay on top of it.
Okay. Thank you. So the next question is from a brother, actually from another pastor at my church, Pastor Kyrie Chapman. He chimed in over Facebook and asked, I feel like there's a lack of OGs available looking to pay it forward. How do we find those men? And we got some OGs on the phone right now who are giving their wisdom and they're paying it forward. So that's a question out to you all. Where do we find those OGs for the young brothers?
Go ahead, brother. Excuse me.
I think we have to look no further than, in ourselves, first and foremost, and deal with that level of accountability and hold those that in our inner circle accountable, because everyone is made for a change, but everyone ain't ready to make the change, if I may say, not to be philosophical, but that's the reality. I think it just takes a sense of bravery and honesty and calling men out on their BS. There are a lot of grown men, but they are not elders. You get what I'm saying? So oftentimes, a lot of men are coming out now, men and women are coming out, and they're holding themselves accountable and paying it forward without even having to tell them. It's like when you're inside that beast, all you can do is read, exercise, and think. And sometimes your thoughts get so loud that you're forced to find a better way, right? Because we know that the system is not designed to build, like they said, prison is not made to rehabilitate, it's meant to warehouse. So when you come home, all we have to do is just be respected in our communities, and those who respected us in other ways, they'll get with the program eventually. And then sometimes you have to let the dead bury the dead also, because everyone is not going to come along. Change never came from the masses. If change was cool, everyone would be with it. But change isn't cool. It's not the sexy thing to be. So men and women have to step out on what they know, what they're bringing home with them, and just say, this is who I'm gonna be, and let the people catch up. Because when I came home, everyone was asking, well, they didn't know who I was. And I understand that's a 25-year gap, and you weren't along for the ride in the first place. So once I came home, you had to catch on. And it's a fact for me, it was the knowledge of myself. Once you have the knowledge of yourself, the accountability is there to say, look, I have to do better. If not me, then who? If not now, then when?
Yes, my brother. Rich, did you want to say something on that?
Excuse me, bro.
I don't think I could have said it any better than that, bro.
Amen. So I think we got one last question here, and I think it's a good one. And I appreciate folks for staying on a little longer to answer questions, because this is amazing. I'm really excited about this. So the last question is, what are those aspects of implementing mental health services to those who have experienced incarceration that will be different to people receiving mental health services who have not experienced incarceration? Some aspects could be new methodologies, theories put into practice, et cetera, et cetera. So I know that was a doozy, but everybody got it? Cool. Come on now. I think I'm soliciting feedback. Come on, doctor, give us something there. You know, yeah.
I knew you was coming at me. Well, just that, what was said, it's about implementing new strategies. It's about catering to the person that's across from you. That's why I said we have to move away from the one size fits all, way of dealing with things. We have to teach, self-regulation, emotional regulation. There's so many strategies that can be implemented, and we have to first also understand the culture, because we don't really cater to culture of individuals. It's important that who I'm across from, I understand their culture, because it kind of helps me to understand their behavior and why they function the way they do. And I not only have to understand their culture, I have to respect their culture. Understand that I don't have to agree to understand why you are the way you are. And so taking that out of the picture, and that is once again unpacking any biases that you may have about an individual, a gender, a culture. Unpack all of that, move out of Judgmentville, and see who's across from you and what strategy works for that individual. Because in all honesty, it's not about me pumping my chest as a psychologist. I don't even prescribe meds. I don't like to prescribe meds. That's not the first thing that comes to my mind. I'm not textbook. Textbook tells me to do that. But do you know that trauma can look like schizophrenia? Do you know that trauma can be transferred through semen? We have studies of historical trauma where we know that the effects of slavery is still happening to the generations. Sometimes it may skip a generation and then it shows up in another generation. Trauma is real. And it's not about fixing the person. You're not going in there to do this quick fix and be out. No, for some people, our strategies might work, and that person might only need you for a short period of time. But then for someone else, it's a little longer. And one strategy that was working for a year, you find out, that's not working for him or her anymore, And then also the concept that a memory or a flashback is always a negative thing. That's not true. Sometimes our brain is actually saying to us, you know what? You haven't dealt with this part yet. And so our bodies is actually asking us to heal itself. And that's not what's talked about in some of the psychologists and psychiatrists platforms. And that's why sometimes I'm not the ideal person when I stand in front of them, because I don't mind being the firecracker and telling them they've been doing this thing wrong for years. Okay, and there's not enough of us that are truly trauma informed. They did a study back in 2017, and they realized that only 7% of our therapists were actually identified as African American or Asian or Hispanic. How can I take you someplace I haven't been? I have to also know that I've experienced trauma and take care of my trauma first before I try to heal you. Otherwise, I'm going to make a mess of this thing. I'm going to mess up your life because I haven't unpacked mine. So we have to unpack ourselves, implement new strategies, and have the empathy and compassion to move forward. Move forward and don't have the one size fits all, man. We have to do better. We have to do better.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hunt. Thank you so much. Shawanna, I'm gonna turn it over to you. First, I'm gonna say thank you to all of the panelists publicly, and then after I cut off the live, I'll say it privately to you all. I want to say thank you to everyone who listened, who stayed on. I see some familiar faces in the chat, some new people there. I see people engaging in so many different ways, and I want to encourage you to take this information out of here. This is how change happens. We hear the new narratives, we hear the new information, we take that information to other people, and we impact the lives of other people. So if you learned something today, if all of this touched your heart in a certain way, if you have gotten any bit of understanding today, take that and do something with it that will help towards a better future and us doing better, as the doctor said. I'm going to be quiet now. Shawanna, thank you very much for allowing me to host / be a moderator. I hope I didn't let you down. Yeah, I'm going to just turn it over to you.
I want to say thank you to everybody. Like, my heart is so full right now. I had pain, and I wanted to make purpose out of it. And you guys don't even know what today means to me. I didn't know I was going to see y'all today.
Yeah.
So I'm real excited. I went to get, right now I'm in a hotel in Philadelphia, and I came to get a procedure that was supposed to take 30 minutes. And on the table, I coded. But I want y'all to know that before I went into surgery, Dr. Carol Ann Hunt prayed for me. And she told me all would be well.
Yes, yes.
And I went into a procedure and I told her bye, and I said, I'll talk to you in a little while. And when I woke up, I saw nurses and doctors crying, and I said, what happened? They said, you died. They called my son and they told him I coded. And I said, okay. They let me out today and they told me all the problems. And all I could do was tell them God is not done with me yet because I got work to do. So you don't know how much you guys mean showing up to me right now. And Glenn, I love you out loud. I love you out loud. I love you, Glenn Martin, out loud so bad. Because we don't take the time to heal hurting people, and we play games. And if I'm not here tomorrow, I need everybody that is here to get this bill passed so that other people can get help. I don't mind being an Indian because I don't gotta be a chief. This is about us and we and not me, because my pain is your pain. And you are my brothers and I am your sisters, and I promise you, I will die to be your keeper. So y'all don't know how much you mean to me. Don't. This bill is like birthing a third baby because prison broke me. And I've been trying to heal myself for 20 years and I'm still broken. And I don't care how much the total cost. I'm willing for the taxpayer, because I pay taxes, to foot the bill. We've been paying for the prison industrial complex with no resolution. So how about we pay for people's sanity? And like Glenn said, tear it down, because it's an institution that should not be. Dr. Carolyn said, this is slavery. I want to tell y'all, we are watching the people kill each other outside and be destroyed. And we got enough wherewithal to write policy and legislation to amend the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th, and challenge the 8th. And I want everybody who's marching to get a pen and some paper, because I have no education that warrants writing a bill. But I had enough pain and enough know-how to go sit at Columbia in a class that I ain't paid for and get the same education and read books for dummies and YouTube for dummies and Google for everything until I figured it out. Listen, God allowed me to meet amazing people that said, I got you. And if it was not for you guys, let me tell you what, we talk about Obama giving people dare to the audacity to dream and hope. Well, Glenn Martin, for me, that goes to you, because you dared to make me dream and think that I could do silent cry for people's cries to be heard. When I was at the bottom, when I lost a job and they shot at my house, you gave me the audacity to dream that we could be better than we were. Bless you for everything. You gave the multitude. Even if they don't say thank you, I'm going to stand in the gap and say thank you for them. My brother Arthur, you have done the world a service, because your 25 years will not be in vain. And I thank you for being man enough to tell me that you hurt, so I can put you as the face, because Black men are hurting. And I thank you for being man enough to stand up and say, use my face and tell the world that we are hurt, but we want to be healed. I can't thank you for your vulnerability. Isaac, my brother, thank you for everything you do, because you give people hope in art. You took your pain and you turned it into purpose. And you created a platform not just for self, but for everybody. And you don't exclude anybody. Even when people don't give you the credit that you deserve, you keep on going. But I'm here to tell you, God gave you every credit that the man won't give you. So you got this. You got this. Phil, I thank you for being behind a man and you fight for people's bills. You answer texts, you answer phone calls. You are amazing. This young 25-year-old brother who is in Michigan, and he's the youngest assemblyman. Y'all want to know how I met that brother? Because the people in prison that I fight for said, we got an assemblyman and we speak to him every day. I was like, what? Hold on. And he said, I'll fight with you because you're fighting for my people. Richard is so amazing. Richard, if you are still on this line, my brother, you are absolutely amazing. And I thank you for taking your years of pain and turning them into purpose and telling Black men, I can go from prison, from bringing the junior lifer to the ACLU. That's a dream, and that's a testament. And you do it with an education, and you want to take other people with you. Thank you. Dr. Carolyn, I don't even know what to say about you, because I don't even have the words, because you just taught me it's not length of time, it's quality of a human, and God gave you something past a doctor. There's a calling, there's a role for you somewhere, there's a church calling your name. I just want to thank you for what you give, because you gave me water in a desert when my soul was empty. See, nobody want to tell the truth. But if I would have died yesterday, you wouldn't have known my truth. So I just want people to know that this bill is not about me. This bill is about us. This is a bill about healing. This is not about mass incarceration and mental health. This is about the world, and we are in a mental health pandemic, and everybody is messed up. But be bold enough, be audacious enough, as he said, to tell the world you are messed up, and we need help. We don't have any more time. As we see the world on fire, we don't have time. The world is mentally crying. He said, if you don't cry, the rock's gonna cry in your place. I refuse to let the rock cry in my place. So thank you for hearing my silent cries. Thank you. Thank you, Haiti, behind the camera, because Isaac has a wife that you can't see, but she's amazing because she stands behind a man, and she sat here for all of this to help us make this come together. Thank you for everybody's husband and wife who allowed them to take the time to do this, because that is amazing. And everybody's kids who allowed them to be in this space, that we took time from them to give to the world of ourselves daily. I just want to say thank you, everybody, because I love you. And I know that we play with time, and if tomorrow never comes, I want to tell you I love you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Black woman. And that love is extended to you as well. Much appreciated.